They whispered of him, wherever the sea could be heard. In smoke-thick taverns along the Flagler coast, sailors leaned over chipped mugs and traced his legend in spilled ale. In the markets of Turtle Bay, mothers warned their children in hushed tones not to look too long at the crimson sails when they appeared on the horizon. In the western tropics, where the waters glowed blue-green under the moons and Nexu storms sometimes rose like living things, mermaids sang of him in broken, mournful chords. Captain James Bartholomew Kane, Hook. They said his laugh could split storms. They said his iron hand could cleave through mast and man alike. They said he plucked the hearts out of honest merchants and fed them to the waves. They said many things. Most of them were wrong. The night his story began, Turtle Bay smelled of rain and ink. James Kane sat at his father's desk, the lamplight painting amber circles over ledgers and maps. Outside the office window, the harbor muttered, with its usual evening chorus, creak of rigging, distant laughter, faint chime of Nexu-lit buoys bobbing in the dark water. Rain tapped hesitantly on the glass, as if asking permission to fall harder. James dipped his pen, steady hand gliding over parchment as numbers became patterns, patterns became certainty. Trade winds, projected profits, the flow of coin from Flagler Coast to the western tropics. He'd always loved the logic of it, how the world could be charted, if one only paid attention. Behind him, the door opened. "You're still at it?" His younger sister's reflection appeared in the window beside his own. Elise, hair coiled in a ribbon knot, shawl wrapped tight around slender shoulders. She rolled her eyes. "The ball has already started. I'll attend when there's a reason," James murmured without looking up. "And when Father returns, it will please him to see the ledgers balanced." Father would be twice as pleased if you made a good match tonight." Elise stepped closer, peering down at the figures with a wrinkle of her nose. "Lady Alara will be there. She asked after you yesterday." Something tightened behind his ribs. Alara of House Valmain, the only person in Turtle Bay who could make him forget how much he preferred charts to people. "She asked if you were still breathing," Elise added cheerfully, "which I believe in her language is a declaration of intent." James snorted, setting his pen aside to knead the bridge of his nose. "I will attend, in time." "You always say that." Elise moved around the desk, then leaned down to brush a kiss against his cheek. "Don't be late enough that they start whispering. You know how this city is." He did. Turtle Bay was a place of silk and smiles and knives hidden in the folds. "You've done enough numbers for one night," Elise continued, gathering up a few of the scrolls to stack them neatly. "The sea will be there tomorrow. The books will be there tomorrow. Alara won't wait forever. Perhaps she will," he muttered, but her words burrowed into him anyway. Because as much as he loved the quiet, the patterns, the certainty of ink, there was a part of him, a small, foolish part, that wanted something more. Not adventure, as other young men spoke of with starry eyes. Not glory. Just the freedom to be more than what the merchant houses decided for him. "Elise," he said, as she reached the door, "did Father send word from Flagler yet?" Her face, bright with teasing, dimmed just a little. "Nothing today. The courier said the seas were rough near the western tropics. But you know Father, he always returns." James nodded, though a small, cold unease lapped at the edges of his thoughts. The western tropics could turn on a ship as quickly as a spurned lover. Islands shifted, currents lied. And there were other dangers, pirates, storms, Nexu anomalies, spoken of in half-joking tones. His father knew those waters. His father was careful. His father always returned. "Go," Elise said softly. "Before I drag you there myself." He allowed himself a faint smile. "I would like to see you try. Don't tempt me." When she left, the office felt larger, emptier. The lamplight seemed too bright, the ink on the page too dark. James sighed, capping the bottle. He rose, straightening the lapels of his dark waistcoat, smoothing the silk of his cuffs. The man in the window's reflection looked composed, competent, born to sit at a desk with a harbor behind him like a painting. It was almost enough to believe. Almost. He blew out the lamp and stepped into the hallway, the polished floors of the Kane estate whispering under his boots. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from the ball, strings and laughter, the clinking of glass. The air smelled faintly of sea salt even here, as if the ocean was a guest that would not be denied. At the top of the stair, he paused. A murmur below, raised voices. The edge in them pricked at his skin like a sudden chill. James descended, hands sliding along the rail. The foyer unfolded below, marble floor, chandelier blazing. The grand double doors shut against the rain. Standing just inside those doors were 3 men in navy uniforms, deep blue trimmed in gold. Their boots were damp, their expressions colder than the weather. Flagler Coast Navy. At the center, his posture a sliver of iron, was Admiral Percival Whitmore. James had met him only once, years ago, when House Kane secured a lucrative shipping contract. Whitmore had shaken his hand with a politician's smile, all charm and calculation. Now, his presence here felt like a blade at the throat. "Admiral," James said, schooling his face into polite surprise as he reached the bottom step. "This... an unexpected..." "James Bartholomew Kane," Whitmore said. His voice carried the precise cadence of court hearings and death sentences. "By authority of the Flagler Coast Crown and the Admiralty Council, you are under arrest." Silence struck the foyer like a physical blow. Elise, halfway down the opposite stair with her ball gown gathered in one hand, froze. A servant dropped a silver tray. It clattered across the marble, echoing far too loudly. James blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Whitmore nodded to the officer at his side, who produced a rolled parchment. The royal seal of Flagler glinted on the ribbon. "Charges," the Admiral said, eyes never leaving James's face, "of piracy, smuggling, and treason against the crown." The words did not fit inside James's head. They bounced off the walls of his skull. Absurd as claiming the sea was made of sand. "That's impossible," Elise burst out, voice shaking. "My brother..." "Silence." Miss Whitmore didn't look at her. "This matter concerns the crown." James's heart thudded slow and heavy, but his mind moved with the practiced clarity of a man used to reading contracts line by line. "This is a mistake," he said evenly. "Our ledgers are open to inspection. Every shipment, every route." "Indeed." Whitmore's lips twitched, not quite into a smile. "Which is how we discovered your dealings, Captain." The title was a mockery in his mouth. James swallowed against the dryness in his throat. "We have no dealings outside Crown sanction. You know that. There is nothing. There is the testimony of 3 independent captains," Whitmore cut in smoothly, "each reporting attacks along the Flagler Western Tropic route. The raiders knew the manifests, the schedules, the weakest points in each convoy's route. Information available only to the Crown and to House Kane." His gaze flicked around the foyer, to the oil portraits on the walls, the polished banister, the chandelier. "Profits dipped last year, did they not?" he mused. "The Western Tropics have been unkind to your family voyages, I hear. Desperate times make desperate men, Mr. Kane." James felt something raw and furious claw up his spine. "We have never..." The officer unfurled the parchment, clearing his throat. "Witnessed," he read, "by Admiral Percival Whitmore, Captain Lionel Garrick, and Lord Henry Colap of Flagler Coast, that one James Bartholomew Kane did conspire to raid Crown ships, sell Crown goods to black markets along the Mer coast, and..." "Colap," James whispered, the rival merchant lord who'd been circling their contracts like a shark, teeth bared in genial smiles. The man who'd offered a partnership over tea 4 weeks ago and hadn't bothered to hide his displeasure when James refused. The word tasted like bile. Henry Colap, the man who belongs to family, who tried to take control of the country twice and succeeded once, even if it was for a brief period. Whitmore's eyes cooled another degree. "You will have ample opportunity to protest, Mr. Kane, in court." A motion of his gloved hand. "Seize him." Elise moved first. She flew down the remaining steps, skirts snapping around her ankles, placing herself between James and the advancing officers with a ferocity that startled even him. "You cannot simply drag him away on the word of someone from the dishonored Colap family," she snapped. "Where is father?" "He will." "Your father," Whitmore said, and for the first time, something like genuine pity flickered across his face, "was found 3 days ago off the Western Tropics. The report will be delivered to you in full by morning." The world narrowed. James stared. Elise's knees buckled. James caught her instinctively, his arms wrapping around her as if he could shield her from words already spoken. The rain outside intensified, lashing against the windows, driven by a wind that smelled suddenly of salt and iron. "James," Elise whispered, fingers digging into his coat. "James, they're lying. They have to be. They take him," Whitmore said quietly. Hands closed on James's arms, rough and unyielding. For a heartbeat he considered fighting, Nexu snarled in his blood, an instinctive flare through the chakras he so rarely tapped. But muscle against 3 armed officers would end poorly. Nexu use in the presence of an admiral would seal any doubt. He had built his life on measured decisions, on logic over impulse. So he released Elise, meeting her panicked gaze with what he hoped looked like calm. "It will be sorted," he said. He wasn't sure which of them he was lying to. "Stay with the staff. Do not speak to anyone from House Lab. James." They dragged him toward the door. He craned his neck, just once, to look past the admiral. Beyond the stained glass, the harbor lanterns flickered in the rain. Masts swayed like bare trees in a storm. Somewhere out there, ships moved through the dark, their crews unaware that one of Turtle Bay's most respectable merchant sons was being marched toward ruin. As the door opened and cold air slapped his face, James Bartholomew Kane felt something shift inside him. Not break, not yet, but hairline fractures spread across the polished surface of the life he'd so carefully crafted. One betrayal, he thought, as the rain swallowed him. Just one. The courtroom smelled of damp stone and old paper. James stood in iron manacles at the center, wrists chafing against the metal as the magistrate read the charges in a bored monotone. The gallery was full, merchants in fine coats, officers in uniform, courtiers with veiled faces. Their whispers skittered across the room like rats. He searched their faces, not for mercy, he knew better, for truth. Alara sat with the other highborn women, a sweep of dark hair escaping her jeweled comb, her eyes fixed on the floor. Once, she had argued with him over tariff law in this very hall, their disagreement drawing amused looks from elders unused to being corrected by someone so young. She had laughed then, soft, genuine. Now, her hands clutched her fan so tightly her knuckles blanched. "Alara," he said once, quietly, as evidence he'd never seen was presented. Ledgers he'd never signed, shiplogs he'd never written. "Look at me. Tell them this is madness." Her gaze flinched toward him, then away. Her jaw set. Not a word. A coldness far deeper than fear seeped into him, sinking into marrow. The magistrate asked if he had anything to say in his defense. He thought of Elise, face swollen from crying, of his father's empty chair at the head of the cane table, of the collapse-smooth documents placed neatly in front of the court. "I trusted the wrong men," James said simply. "That is my crime." Gasps fluttered, quickly smothered. Someone tittered nervously. The magistrate frowned. I admit," James said, voice hardening as something sharp and bitter bubbled up from the cracks, "that if I had realized sooner how deeply corruption had rooted itself in this city, I might have burned it out at the source." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Whitmore watched from the side, arms folded, expression unreadable. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty. Sentence. Execution by hanging upon the Dauntless's return to port 3 days hence. They did not grant him a final visit with Elise. They did not allow him to see his father's body if it had indeed been recovered. They returned him to a damp stone cell with a barred window that looked out only upon another wall. That night, lying on the cot with shackles biting into his skin, James stared at the ceiling and tried very hard not to think. It didn't work. His mind replayed every word, every contract, every handshake. Every time he'd assumed that because he followed the rules, others would too. That fairness was something more than a story told to children to make them sleep. He had believed in systems, in order, in reason. Now, reason brought him here, betrayed by a rival, discarded by a court that found it easier to condemn one man than untangle the rot beneath. Rage came then, hot, blinding, useless. He let it burn through him until it left ash. In the quiet that followed, he found something else, a strange, brittle calm. If they had decided he was a monster, then perhaps that was what he would become. Not for them, never for them, for himself, for the ones like him who would never see justice from gilded halls. The thought was still half-formed when footsteps approached. 2 sets. Unsteady, a third, firm. The cell door scraped open. Whitmore filled the doorway, lantern in hand, shadows stretching long across the floor. Behind him, 2 guards shifted nervously, the alcohol on their breath clinging to the air. "Enjoying your accommodations, Mr. Kane?" the Admiral asked mildly. James pushed himself up on his elbows. "I assume you didn't come to ask after my comfort." "No." Whitmore's gaze flicked to the shackles, then back. "I came to ask why." James blinked. "Pardon?" Whitmore stepped inside, gesturing for the guards to remain outside. The door clanged shut behind him, though the key stayed in the lock. He set the lantern on the floor. Light crawled over stone and iron. "You had every advantage," he said, voice low. "House Kane was respectable, trusted. You had trade routes men would kill for. Why risk it? If you'd wanted a command, you could have earned one in the Navy by privilege alone, something your ancestor Darren did not have." "I did not risk it," James bit out, "because I did not do it." Whitmore regarded him quietly. "You truly believe that matters?" James stared. Something in the Admiral's face shifted, as if a mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. "The world is not a ledger, Mr. Kane," Whitmore said softly. "There is what is true, and what can be proven. And then there is what is useful. Useful." Kolap's name flashed in James's mind again. Kolap with his easy smile and subtle threats. Kolap, who could never have overtaken Kane shipping while James remained untainted. "You signed the papers," James whispered. "You knew the charges were false." Whitmore's jaw tightened, the only crack in his composure. "Kolap's intel has been profitable for the Crown." "Profitable, ah," James said hollowly. "And when did you begin taking your own cut, Admiral?" The temperature in the cell seemed to drop. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. "Careful," he murmured. James laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off stone. "What will you do? Hang me twice?" For a long moment, they simply stared at one another. Whitmore broke first, exhaling through his nose, some tension leaking from his shoulders. "You are not the first man to be crushed beneath the weight of convenience," he said. "You will not be the last. But there is a way this ends with some measure of dignity, Mr. Kane. A confession. A note suitably contrite, acknowledging your crimes. Your family spared further embarrassment. Your 4 greats of a grandfather knew that. However, since he was too poor, he didn't even have a surname. What did he use to call himself? I got it. It was Darren, son of Bray, and that he was from North Valley. Like that even mattered. But what does matter is that it is how you gain your werebadger form, not that you use it. And because of your family's noble past, your sister could be provided for by House Kolap as compensation for her loss." James's stomach twisted. Compensation. "She is comely," Whitmore noted, in the tone of a man discussing cargo quality. "Kolap favors brunettes." James moved before thinking, chains clanking as he lunged off the cot. The shackles snapped taut, wrenching him short, but momentum carried him forward enough to slam into Whitmore, shoulder driving into the Admiral's chest. They crashed against the bars. The lantern toppled, flame flaring. Whitmore cursed, shoving him back with surprising strength. For an instant, his calm shattered, and James saw the man beneath, the fury, the disgust, the conviction that this upstart merchant's son had no right to bare teeth. The Admiral backhanded him. James's head snapped sideways. Copper flooded his mouth. He laughed again, blood spattering the floor. "Strike a man in chains. How very noble." Whitmore stepped back, drawing a slow breath. The mask slid back into place with practiced ease. 3 days, he said. "If you change your mind, ask for me." He reached for the lantern. The flame licked at the spilled oil. Hungry. Whitmore cursed again, snatching it up before the fire could catch. He stamped at a few sparks, then straightened, door already opening. "See that he doesn't do anything. Unfortunate," he told the guards. Tone clipped. When the door shut again, darkness swallowed James. He lay back on the cot, cheek throbbing, chest tight with something too big and jagged to be named. He thought of Elise, of Kolap's hands on her, of Whitmore's cool eyes, of a system that called this justice. The thought that came then was not measured, nor logical, nor careful. It was simple. "I will not die here." He turned it over and over, like a coin between his fingers, until it caught some strange grim light and became a promise. The storm arrived the night before his hanging. Rain hammered the prison roof, turned the streets of Turtle Bay into slick black veins. Thunder rolled over the harbor, rattling shutters and shaking loose tiles. Lightning flashed, briefly carving the prison's silhouette into the sky like a black tooth. James lay awake, listening to the storm's fury. It rang in his bones, a mirror to the tempest in his chest. Then, faintly, another sound, a scraping at stone, a muttered curse. He sat up. The small barred window above his cot glowed pale with occasional lightning. In between flashes, it was only darkness. "Kane," a voice hissed. "You still breathing?" James's heart lurched. "Who's there?" A shadow moved across the window. A hand slid through the bars, a calloused hand, fingers tipped with faintly glowing runes. Nexu sigils. A moment later, the smell of hot metal seared the air as energy hummed. The shackle around his right wrist grew hot. He gritted his teeth as the iron glowed, then softened. With a grunt, the unseen figure outside yanked, not on the shackle, but on the chain itself. It snapped with a shriek, metal giving way under Nexu-fueled strength. "Left," the voice said. James offered the other wrist. Again, heat. Again, a sharp tug. The chains fell away in two limp, useless lengths. "On your feet, Captain," the figure said. "Storm's not going to hold forever." Captain, no one had ever called him that. James rose, legs unsteady. "Who sent you?" Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the face beyond the bars. Moss, once a dock worker on the Kane wharves, half orc and half something more bestial, with eyes that saw currents the way others saw ink. James remembered teaching him to read a compass, sliding him a few extra coins on lean weeks. "Well, I wasn't going to leave you for the gulls," Moss said, "and your sister threatened to gut me herself if I failed." "Elise," James breathed. "She's waiting." Moss jerked his head. "Move back." James did. Moss pressed his glowing palm flat against the bars. Sigils flared brighter, humming as Nexu energy channeled through his arm. The iron warped, sagged, then gave with a screeching groan, leaving a gap just barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. "Come on," Moss urged. Before the guards decide they preferred dry boots to duty, the world narrowed to the window, to the gap, to the rain slicing through the opening like cold knives. James climbed, shoulders scraping stone, ribs squeezing through. The edges of broken bars tore at his shirt, bit into his skin. He emerged on the exterior ledge, wind punching the breath from his lungs. The prison wall dropped sheer to a narrow drainage canal, black water churning. Moss clamped a strong hand around his arm. "You miss, you die," he yelled over the storm. "You hit wrong, you break your legs, and then you die." "Comforting," James muttered, teeth chattering. Moss flashed a grin, rain streaming from his tusk-notched jaw. "Good luck, Captain." He shoved him. For a heartbeat, there was only air and the sick lurch of falling. Then impact. The canal swallowed him, icy water slamming into nerves already alive with adrenaline. He sank, disoriented, then kicked hard, lungs burning. He broke the surface with a gasp, rain pelting his face. Moss hit the water beside him a second later, resurfacing with a curse. "This way," he bellowed. "Current runs toward the lower docks." The canal dragged them, the storm's fury turning it into a black artery that spat them out near the harbor. Twice, James slammed against stone, fingers scraping slimy brick. He tasted blood and sewage and freedom. They emerged at last into the open harbor, clinging to a barnacle-crusted ladder. Above, the masts of Turtle Bay's ships loomed like the skeletons of sleeping giants, rigging hissing in the wind. A shadow detached itself from under the nearest pier. Elise, she wore a cloak soaked through, curls plastered to her cheeks, eyes blazing. Beside her, a small boat bobbed, rope tied to a piling. "You're late," she said, voice trembling. "Your timing was impeccable," James coughed, hauling himself onto the slippery planks with Moss's help. "I bribed half the prison kitchen and threatened the other half," she snapped, grabbing his face between her hands, to peer at him, as if checking for missing pieces. "They said you argued with the Admiral." "Among other things," he said dryly. "Good." Her gaze flicked to the torn shackles hanging loosely from his wrists. A strange light entered her eyes. "Remember this, James. Remember exactly who did this to you." "I will," he said softly. "Where will you go?" not collapse. Her lips curled around the name. He sent flowers this morning. Can you imagine? I burned them. A strange, fierce pride swelled in him. There are houses in the Murcoast still loyal to father, Elise continued. Quiet ones. I'll be safe enough. Safer than you, at least. Come with me, he said impulsively. We can disappear together. Start. And do what? She stepped back, shaking her head. You know the sea, James, but you've never sailed it yourself. You'd drown both of us in a week. He opened his mouth to protest, then shut it. She wasn't wrong. The man who walked into that courtroom would drown, she said more gently. The man I see now. She looked him over, soaked, bruised, eyes darker than they once were. He might not. Lightning cracked, illuminating the harbor. For an instant, James saw a shape further out, a ship slipping away from the crowded docks. Her sails furled, oars pulling her into the dark. You have a ship? He asked sharply. Favor. Elise's smile was sharp. You are not the only one who treated dock rats like people, brother. They remember. Moss snorted. And we're hard to get rid of. Go, Elise said. Before Whitmore realizes the storm's cover works both ways. Elise, his throat closed around the word. So many things he wanted to say. I'm sorry. Be careful. I'll come back. He settled on. I will make this right. Her eyes softened. No, she said quietly. You'll make them regret ever thinking you were weak. She kissed his cheek, then shoved him toward the boat. Moss climbed in first, steadying it. James followed, the wood rocking under their combined weight. Elise loosed the rope with quick fingers. As they drifted away from the pier, rain veiling everything in silver threads, James looked back. Elise stood on the docks, cloak whipping in the wind, a small, solitary figure against Turtle Bay's looming silhouette. For a moment, the storm's noise receded. He committed the image to memory, a compass point he would never willingly forget. Then the boat turned, the current caught them, and the city where James Cain had been born began to shrink behind them. Ahead lay the open sea. Ahead lay whatever he chose to become. They did not find him. The search boats Whitmore sent out scoured the immediate harbors and reefs. They questioned fishermen and dockside girls, and the old men who always seemed to be mending nets, yet never quite finished. No one had seen a thing. The storm moved on, leaving a fretful calm in its wake. By dawn, the Dauntless's hangman stood on an empty scaffold. Whitmore received the news with a clenched jaw and a headache that felt suspiciously like guilt. He crushed it ruthlessly. Men like James Cain, he told himself, always slipped through cracks. Men like James Cain were always found again. Days later, a different ship found him. James came awake to the slam of waves against wood and the burn of salt on cracked lip. His last clear memory was rain and oars and Moss's cursing as the small boat pitched through swells that grew more vicious the further from shore they rode. He remembered a wave, taller than the others, crashing down, the boat flipping. Cold, endless water. Then, nothing. Now, he lay on rough planks, boards creaking beneath him, the air filled with the scents of tar, brine, and unwashed bodies. Voices thundered overhead, punctuated by the snap of sails. He tried to move. Pain lanced up his right arm. He hissed, vision going white around the edges. Careful, love, a husky voice drawled near his ear. You're not quite whole at the moment. He forced his eyes open. A woman knelt beside him, dark skin gleaming with sea spray, hair bound in tight braids threaded with bits of bone and copper. One ear was torn, the scar running down to her jaw. Her eyes, sharp, shrewd, amused, studied him with the practiced ease of someone used to deciding whether a man was worth saving. Where? His throat scraped. The single word came out broken. You're aboard the Jolly Roger, she said, mistress of the mid-sea, terror of the trade routes, home to the desperate, the damned, and those foolish enough to run at the sea's teeth. She grinned. In other words, you're safe. For the moment. The name was a joke, surely, a child's name for a pirate ship. But the timbers around him hummed with a fierce, stubborn life. The ship's bones were mahogany, dark and strong, the grain etched by years of storms. Above, someone bellowed for more canvas. Somewhere else, a cannon crew sang a filthy shanty in 3 different languages. James Bartholomew Cain, he croaked automatically. Then, because that name tasted like ash and failure, he added. Or at least I was. She glanced at his arm, and pain surged again, as if the acknowledgement had summoned it. He forced himself to look. His right hand, the one that had steadied quills and traced coastlines and signed contracts, was gone. In its place, bandages wrapped a stump just below the wrist, stained through with brown and red. The skin around the wrappings was angry and swollen. Nausea rolled over him. "Storm took you," the woman said, not unkindly. "Or the gods, hard to say which. We found you floating half dead by Teletoon's reefs. Your friend..." "Boss," he whispered. She shook her head once. The world heaved. Not from the ship's motion. A sound clawed at his throat, raw and animal. He swallowed it down. "What choice was that?" he asked, staring at the stump. His voice sounded distant, muffled. "You said I'm not whole. Choice is what comes next." She rose in a fluid motion, offering her left hand. "Name's Rhea. I keep this lot from dying and the ship from sinking." He hesitated, then took it. Her grip was strong, calloused. She pulled him to a sitting position with surprising gentleness. "Your fever broke this morning," she said, "which means you get to decide whether you're going to live like a cripple." Her gaze sharpened, or like something else. "What something else?" he rasped. Rhea's smile turned feral. "Come," she said, "meet your new fate." Forged lay in the bones of an island that appeared as a volcano on maps. The Jolly Roger slipped into its hidden cove at dusk, the crimson of her sails darkening to blood black as the sun sank. Jagged rock teeth crowded the little harbor, warded with carved sigils that glowed faintly, warning off curious currents and the Nexu-sensitive creatures of the deep. They rowed James to shore under a moon that bled pale light over everything. Rhea led the way through a narrow crevice in the cliff, torch held high. The air inside the island's guts was hot and dry, the walls etched with old symbols, pirate oaths, prayers to sea gods both remembered and forgotten, tally marks of lives taken and debts paid. The tunnel opened into a cavern, lit by the glow of molten metal. A forge, not the tidy, contained kind James had seen in Turtle Bay's artisan quarter, but a beast of fire and iron. The stone floor shuddered with the hammer's rhythm as a hulking figure brought it down again and again on a glowing shape over the anvil. "Oi," Rhea called, her voice swallowed and thrown back by the cavern walls. "Got a customer for you, old man." The smith straightened, steam hissing from his bare shoulders where sweat met heat. He was massive, broad as a doorframe, arms corded with muscle, beard braided and threaded with beads of slagged ore. One eye was clouded white, the other gleamed bright as fresh-cooled steel. He peered at James. "This the one lost his hand? This is him." Rhea nudged James forward. "James something fancy. I call him not dead yet." The smith snorted. "His name's Bren," he rumbled. "I make weapons for those the world tried to break." James's gaze dropped to the anvil. The glowing shape there curved like a question mark, wicked and gleaming, still half-formed. The heat from it struck his face, sweat popping on his brow. "A hook," he whispered. "It was meant for a different bastard," Brent said, "but he died last week. Ran his mouth to the wrong tide witch." He shrugged, muscles rolling. "Steel likes a purpose. You look like you have one." Once, his purpose had been profit margins and trade routes. Now, he looked at his bandaged stump, then at the hook, at the forge, at the pirates watching from the shadows, their eyes reflecting fire. "What if I choose not to take it?" he asked. Rhea leaned her hip against a pillar of stone. "Then we drop you at the next port with a few coins and a fine pity story. You can go back to whatever's left of your old life, assuming it doesn't cheerfully hang you this time." Bren grunted. "Or you can take it, learn to use it, make what hurt you into a weapon you wield instead of a wound you nurse." He lifted the hook with tongs, turning it so it caught the light in a deadly wink. "Up to you, boy." Boy. James was not sure whether to laugh or spit. He thought of Whitmore's gloved hands slamming the cell door shut, of Kolap's flowers in Elise's burning hearth, of Turtle Bay's gallery turning its face away, of Moss, who had died so he could float half dead on storm-tossed waves. He thought of the future he'd planned, the ledger-lined path that now lay in shards. "Do it," he said. Rhea's grin flashed. "Good." The pain was a living hell. Bren numbed the stump with bitter herbs and a splash of rum, then with Nexu-etched iron pins that he sank around the bone. James ground his teeth until his jaw ached. refusing to scream. Rhea held his left hand, her grip in anger. You scream, she said conversationally. No shame in it. He shook his head once, sweat dripping from his brow. Bren heated the base of the hook until it pulsed red, then cooled it in an oil bath, etched with runes. Steam rose, carrying the sense of metal and old blood and magic older than kingdoms. The smith murmured under his breath, a prayer not to any divine James recognized, but to the sea itself. Then he placed the hook against the prepared stump. White fire shot up James's arm, streaking through tendon and bone, racing along his spine to explode behind his eyes. For a heartbeat, for an eternity, his world was nothing but raw, burning, all-consuming agony. He screamed then. Of course he did. The sound ripped everything open. Fear, rage, grief, loss, until there was no room for breath. His back arched. Hands pinned him. The smell of his own burned flesh turned his stomach. Then, beneath the pain, something else. Metal fused to bone. Nexu runes flared, not inked on the surface, but etched inside the iron itself. They reached for him, hungry, latching onto the faint threads of latent Nexu that had always whispered through his blood but that he had rarely heeded. The hook drank. His chakras flared in response. Root, heart, crown, a wild, untrained surge. The iron drank that too, shaping it, channeling it, such that the pain twisted, shifted, became something sharp but bearable. He collapsed onto the stone floor, chest heaving. The world slowly returned, cavern roof, Rhea's worried frown, Bren's expectant gaze. James lifted his right arm. The hook gleamed in the forge's light, curved and eager. He flexed phantom fingers, and with them the iron responded, twitching. The weight of it was alien, the balance wrong, but it was there. You'll have to learn it, Bren said. It won't learn you. Treat it like a limb, not a tool, or it'll fight you every swing. James swallowed, the rawness in his throat making each breath a rasp. He asked hoarsely. Why help me? Rhea shrugged. You fell into our waters. That makes you ours, for better or worse. Bren's gaze didn't soften. And I have a fondness for men the world has tried to throw away. Behind them, the pirates in the shadows murmured, some nodding, some shrugging, all watching. Rhea tilted her head, studying James. So, she said, what'll it be? Not dead yet? You going to drift from cove to cove feeling sorry for the life they stole? Or are you going to take this second one and make them wish they'd finished the job properly? He looked at the hook again, at his arm, at the forge, at the people who had pulled him from death and offered him, of all things, a choice. Slowly, he sat up, swaying, then planted his feet on the stone. He said, voice low but steady, is James Bartholomew Kane. A pause, and from this day forward, I will never again be at the mercy of men like Whitmore. He flexed his new hand. The hook curved in answer. Rhea's smile was dangerous and pleased. Welcome aboard, Hook. The name settled on him like a mantle, not one he would have chosen, but one he could grow sharp inside. The first time he killed a man with a hook was terrifyingly easy. The Jolly Roger ran down a merchant bark flying Flagler colors 3 months after his fusion. By then, James had learned the ship's lines better than any ledger he'd ever kept. He knew the way her hull bent with each wave, the subtle shudder when the wind shifted, the songs her crew preferred on long, hot drifts through the western tropics. He'd learned their names, their histories. Rhea, who had once studied healing at a Mer Coast academy until her forbidden Nexu research got her banished. Bren, who'd lost his eye to a Navy cannonball and his faith to the court that called it an accident. Kestrel, the wiry fae with wind Nexu who could climb rigging like a shadow and taste storms days away. They were misfits and monsters and everything in between. They were his. Saw their crimson sails too late. Hooks! A Flagler sailor cried, voice shrill with panic as grappling lines sailed through the air. It's the bloody... James's hook caught the gunwale with a shower of splinters. The iron bit deep, anchoring him as the ships slammed together. He swung across the gap, boots thudding onto the enemy deck, coat snapping behind him like a dark wing. For a heartbeat, the Flagler sailors froze. They'd heard stories, of course, bloody ones. They'd expected a monster. They found a man, tall, coat black as storm clouds. hair loose around a face that had once belonged in Turtle Bay's polite circles. His right arm ended in gleaming red iron, curved wickedly. His eyes were steady, cold, storm gray. "Lay down your weapons," James called, voice carrying over the clash of wood and wave. "No lives need be lost today." A laugh answered him, sharp, disbelieving. "Expect us to believe that from Hook?" James's jaw tightened at the name in another's mouth. A man in a captain's coat pushed forward, sword leveled. "You're a terror and a butcher. We've heard the stories. You sink ships for sport." "Do I?" James said, gaze flicking briefly to the barrels stacked along the bark's deck. They were stamped with the crown's crest, and another mark he recognized now, the subtle sunburst of House Colab. "Tell me, Captain, how much coin did you get for the last shipment that went missing in the Western Tropics? The one where your crew swore it was pirates, yet not a single man bore a mark of resistance." The captain's fingers tightened around the hilt of his sword. James's voice dropped. "There is rot beneath your uniforms. I smell it from here." Rhea landed beside him, blade in each hand. "You heard him," she called to the crewman behind the flagler captain. "Lay down steel and we'll let you row away with your lives and your small clothes. Refuse and—" She wiggled her fingers. "We get to dance." Some sailors exchanged glances. The flagler captain snarled. "You are all criminals," he spat. "Traitors. The crown will hang every last one of you." "Ah," James murmured. "I am well acquainted with the crown's opinion of my neck." The sword scraped free of its scabbard. Moved. The hook flashed, catching the blade near the guard and wrenching it aside. Steel rang as the strike went wide, shattering a lantern. The captain stumbled. James stepped in, shoulder slamming into the man's chest, and brought the hook up under his jaw over his arm. The captain's eyes went wide, then empty. For a moment, everything slowed. The smell of blood, the irregular thunder of boots, the creak of straining rope, the weight of the man sagging against him. Then sound rushed back. A roar from Rhea's crew, cries of surrender from sailors who'd seen enough death. A thud as the captain's body hit the deck. James stood very still, chest heaving. He'd never killed a man like this before. He'd seen death, dock accidents, a sailor falling from rigging, a merchant succumbing to fever on a long voyage, but death delivered by his own hand. His hook, iron, and Nexu and rage dripped red. The pirates watched him. Rhea's gaze was unreadable. Slowly, James wiped the hook clean on the fallen captain's coat. "Search the hold," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Take only Colap's cargo. Any food, water, medicine, leave it. Send them off with enough to reach shore." A murmur of surprise, then a rough cheer. Men surged toward the hatches. Rhea stepped closer. "You could have taken more," she said quietly. "We've mouths to feed. Plenty of greedy merchants in this sea," James replied. "Plenty of Colap's." Her lips twitched. "You're an odd sort of pirate, Hook." He glanced at the crimson sails rippling above them, at the frightened sailors backing away, at the huddled cabin boy clutching a wooden crucifix with white knuckles. "No," he said softly. "I am exactly the sort this sea deserves." Word spread. Ships carrying Colap's mark began vanishing in the night, their cargoes liberated and redistributed along poorer coasts. The Jolly Roger became a phantom, appearing where the wealthy least expected, leaving wreckage and rumors in her wake. Some called him a scourge, others a savior. In taverns, they told stories of Hook who spared the weak and slaughtered the cruel. Children played at being him, brandishing wooden hooks and shouting, "For the cast-off and the broken." Whitmore listened to these tales with increasing displeasure. Every report of a lost ship bearing both the crown and Colap's marks felt like a personal insult. Each rumor of James's iron hand felt like a confession of his own failure, not just to catch the man he'd condemned, but to keep him dead. The Dauntless chased crimson sails across Midgardam's seas, from the Mer coast to the western tropics. They clashed 3 times that first year, once in a narrow strait where cannon fire turned dawn to hell, once off the jagged shoals of Eldoria, once in open water under a sky so full of stars it felt obscene to stain it with blood. Each time, James slipped away. Each time, just their rivalry became legend. Songs were written, ballads of iron and ivory, of justice and vengeance. Children whispered that when storms rose without warning, it was because Hook and Whitmore had crossed paths again. But even legends tire. Even storms eventually break. James knew his luck would not hold forever. The seas were vast but not infinite. The Dauntless was swift, her captain relentless. And Whitmore, for all his rot, was no fool. Eventually, he would corner James, or the sea would claim him. Either way, the story would end. Unless, the first time James heard of the Devil's Coin, it was a joke. They were in a tavern on Tailatoon, Rhea's boots on a table. Hook's coat hung over the back of his chair, his hook polished but covered. The room buzzed with the usual din, laughter, the scrape of chairs, the clink of mugs. An old man with a glass eye and a map of scars on his arms rattled a cup of dice and said, "All this talk of luck and fate and fortune, you lot don't need luck. You need the Devil's Coin. That old story, go sleep it off, Lotmore." "Story, is it?" Lotmore jabbed a finger at the skeptic. "I've seen the island, Valkno, jungle so thick it chokes your breath, ruins older than the divines, and in its heart a cavern where a coin, said to be created by the gods before the divines, hangs suspended over a chasm, black as the deep. You touch it, it speaks, gives you what you want most. An extra hand, someone jeered. Extra brain, someone else ignored them, staring into the middle distance. Power, revenge, redemption, resurrection, whatever your rotten heart craves, but it always takes its due." "What due?" Rhea asked lazily, though James could hear the interest under her drawl. Lotmore's gaze slid to her, then to James. His eyes lingered on the hook. "That's the trick, isn't it?" he said. "You don't know till after." James said nothing. The word resurrection had hooked something inside him. He thought of Moss again, of his father's body never recovered, only reported, of Elise, exiled by necessity, of the life stolen so neatly by Whitmore's pen. Redemption, revenge. Which did he want more? Later, back aboard the Jolly Roger, he traced the map Lotmore had drawn from memory, a rough sketch of the western tropics, overlaid with an X where no island should be. "Valkno," Kestrel said, leaning over his shoulder. "I've heard of it. Sailors vanish near there. Compasses spin. Nexu storms roll out of clear skies. Sounds like a party," Rhea said, tossing an apple and catching it in her teeth. "Sounds like a trap," Bren countered, "the kind that eats ships whole." James's hook tapped the table thoughtfully. "There's no profit in chasing ghost stories," Bren added. "We have Kolop to bleed and Whitmore to outrun. That should be enough for any sane man." "Perhaps I am no longer entirely sane," James murmured. Rhea watched him. "You're seriously considering this? If there is even a chance..." He swallowed. "If there is a chance to undo what was done, to prove, not just to myself but to the world, that they were wrong. Can I ignore it?" "Redemption," Kestrel said quietly. "You think that coin would give you that?" "I don't know what it would give," James admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe death. Maybe worse than death." "Then why go?" Bran demanded. James, the faces he'd come to know, to trust. Men and women the world had cast aside, who had found in him and his crimson-sailed ship something like belonging. They believed in him, not as a noble, not as a merchant, but as a captain who chose them, again and again, over easy coin. "If that coin can change the rules," he said, "then Whitmore will seek it, Kolap will. Men like them always do. I cannot leave such a weapon in their hands." Rhea studied him for a long moment. "You're a fool," she said at last. "But you're our fool." Her lips twisted into a half smile. "We go where you point us, Captain, even into madness." Kestrel groaned. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Bran muttered a prayer to whatever half-remembered gods listened to pirates. The Jolly Roger set her course for Valkno. The western tropics did not want them. The air grew thick as they approached, humidity pressing against lungs like a hand. The sea turned glassy, reflections too clear, as if the world above and the world below had grown indistinguishable. Strange lights flickered beneath the surface, phosphorescent schools of fish, or something older and less comprehensible. Twice, storms rose from a clear horizon, rolling toward them with unnatural speed. Nexu lightning forked green and violet, striking the water in sizzling bursts that raised steam. Kestrel stood at the prow, wind Nexu flaring, guiding them through gaps in the storm walls by instinct and luck. At night, James dreamed of waves with teeth and coins spinning endlessly, faces trapped in their reflections. Still, the Jolly Roger pressed on. At last, Valkno appeared, an island that shouldn't exist, looming suddenly from a bank of fog. Its cliffs rose sheer, draped in cascades of jungle vines that glowed faintly with bioluminescent growths. Birds wheeled above the canopy. Too many, too silent. They found a narrow beach of black sand, waves clawing at it like reluctant guardians. The air smelled of wet earth and the electric tang of Nexu. "Leave a skeleton crew," James ordered. "Brent, you have the ship. Rhea, Kestrel, you're with me. And 10 others." He paused, scanning the faces gathering on the sand. Many eager, a few pale. "This is not a raid," he said. "Anyone who wishes to stay aboard may do so without shame." He meant it. Some, enough remained. They entered the jungle. Valkno closed around them like a held breath. The canopy swallowed sunlight, turning the world green and gold. Vines dangled like nooses, leaves broad enough to catch a man. Insects whirred, but no larger animals moved. No monkeys chattered. No predators James prowled. Felt watched. Rhea's hand hovered near her blade. Kestrel's eyes darted, brow furrowed as if listening to wind that refused to speak. The first trial revealed itself at a river. The water flowed clear and cold, cutting straight across their path. There was no bridge, no ford. The current, when Kestrel tossed in a branch to test it, dragged the wood under and spat it out downstream as splinters. "Not natural," she muttered. "The flow's too strong. It's like the river's angry." Rhea knelt, fingertips brushing the surface. "Nexu," she said. "Old. Deep. It wants something." "What?" one of the crewmen asked nervously. The answer came when James took a step closer. The river was not a river. It was the courtroom, the gallery above, the magistrate's bored eyes, Whitmore's calm, Alara's bowed head, his father's empty chair. The scene shimmered on the water's surface, too vivid to be mere reflection. "Captain?" Rhea's voice sounded distant. James stared. In the water, the scene replayed, but different. In this version, he refused to go quietly. He called out Kolap by name, produced ledgers he'd never had time to forge showing the rival lord's dealings. The magistrate's eyes widened. Murmurs rose. Whitmore hesitated. Scene shifted again. In another thread, Alara stood, voice ringing clear as she denounced the charges, producing a letter, a confession from one of Kolap's captains. The court turned. The magistrate pounded his gavel. Freedom, vindication, redemption, all just a step away. All James in the water, Rhea said, closer now. "Do you see something?" "Memories," he whispered, "or possibilities." He could step forward, reach out, fall into the river, and chase those phantom lives. He took a breath instead. The air tasted of damp leaves and old stone, not courtroom dust. "These are lies," he said, voice rough. "Pretty ones." He stepped back. "Lies." The images fragmented, swirling, then vanished. The river was only water again. Rhea exhaled slowly. "Well," she murmured, "that's one way to pass a test." "How do we cross?" Kestrel asked. As if in answer, the river's current gentled. Stones rose from the riverbed, pushing through the surface to form a jagged stepping stone path. "Of course," Kestrel muttered. "Island wants us to prove we're not idiots, before killing us later." They crossed one by one, the water whispering at their ankles. Each trial tested something different. In a clearing carpeted with white flowers, they faced apparitions of those they'd lost. Rhea's little sister, drowned in a Navy raid. Kestrel's first captain, body shattered on rocks. Moss, eyes crinkling at the corners as he tossed James a rope. "Come with me," Moss said, voice too gentle. "There's peace here. No more fighting, no more hooks, just rest." James's chest ached, he said. "I owe you more than that." The illusion's eyes hardened, not in anger, but in approval. Then he faded, petals swirling upward. In a ruined temple strangled by vines, they faced their own reflections in cracked stone mirrors, every flaw, every cruelty, every selfish act magnified. One crewman, unable to bear the sight of himself, attacked his reflection. His blade met stone, the blow rebounded, shattering both mirror and his sanity. He ran screaming into the jungle, never seen again. The survivors moved on, quieter, humbled. At last, deep in Valkno's heart, they found the cavern. It pulsed with a light not entirely physical, a slow, throbbing glow like a dying star. The walls were slick with some mineral that reflected that light, in shifting patterns, creating the illusion of motion where there was none. In the center of the cavern yawned a chasm. It dropped away into darkness that swallowed the glow whole, offering no hint of bottom. Over that endless throat of stone, hanging in the air without any visible support, spun a coin. Black as pitch, its surface bore etchings that refused to stay still, symbols James didn't recognize, but that made his skin crawl with a sense of wrongness. They slid and curled like ink in water, rearranging themselves into shapes the eye could almost understand before slipping away. The devil's coin. "You really brought us to the mouth of the world," Rhea murmured, voice hushed despite herself. "Congratulations, Captain. You're officially mad." James stepped to the chasm's edge, heart pounding. The coin hung just beyond arm's reach, close enough to touch if he leaned. The air around it hummed, a pressure against his eardrums, a taste of metal on his tongue. "Be careful," Kestrel whispered. "Wind's funny here. Falls go up as often as down." He didn't quite know what she meant, but he took the warning to heart. He planted his boots solidly, feeling the stone's subtle tremor underfoot. "Everyone else back," he said quietly. "If this goes poorly, we go poorly with you," Rhea began. "That's an order," he snapped, sharper than he'd intended. Silence. Rhea's jaw tightened, but she stepped back. The others followed, their presence retreating to the cavern's perimeter, a ring of trust on the edge of something unfathomable. Drew a breath. "One choice," he muttered. "Perhaps this time I won't make the wrong one." He reached out. The hook extended, iron gleaming in the coin's unnatural light. For a heartbeat, he considered using it to prod the thing like a dangerous flotsam. He overruled the impulse. If this coin dealt in truth, twisted, painful truth, then it deserved bare skin. He extended his left hand. His fingers brushed cold. The world unraveled. He was 12, standing on the deck of his father's ship as it cut through gentle western tropic waves. The air smelled of salt and citrus and ink. His father laughed, clapping him on the shoulder as he traced constellations James had already memorized. "Always know your stars, boy," his father said. "When all else fails, they don't." The scene lurched. He was 20, ink staining his cuffs, Tesselara laughing over a misfiled ledger. "You cannot charm numbers, James," she teased. "They either add up or they don't." Another lurch. The courtroom, the chains, Whitmore's cold eyes, Alara's lowered gaze, Elisa's hands reaching for him and being held back. He saw not only what had happened, but the possibility of it breaking differently, words he could have said, evidence he might have fabricated, alliances he could have forged in shadows instead of trusting in light, shards spinning around him. They reformed into futures, a world where he had never been accused, where he'd married Alara, inherited his father's ships, expanded Kane influence across Midgardum. He became a respected voice on trade councils, his arguments shaping legislation that starved pirates and fattened merchant houses. He saw himself older, comfortable, stomach softer, eyes duller. Lisa's children bounced on his knee. Kolap was still rich, Whitmore still powerful. The rot remained, simply better perfumed. He saw himself in naval blue, Whitmore's protege, his strategic mind turned toward hunting men like, well, himself. He requested harsher punishments, argued that some lives were acceptable sacrifices for order. He grew a beard to hide the bitterness in his mouth. He saw himself never leaving the cell, felt the rope bite his neck, the world narrowing, then exploding into dark. Elise wept. Whitmore slept fine. Another. He saw himself now, on the Jolly Roger's deck, still Hook, what with the coin's power thrumming at his fingertips. He could sink any ship with a thought, tear Kolap's mansions from their foundations, collapse Turtle Bay's corrupt court onto its own head. He could raise the drowned, pull moss from the deep, call his father's body up from wherever the sea had taken it, and breathe life back into cold lungs. He saw himself reshaping the seas, creating storms that only spared the poor, capsizing any vessel that bore the marks of greed. Merchants knelt, navy ships broke, he would be a god of the mid-sea. Beloved, feared, alone. Because what was a man with such power but a monster in more gilded armor? The vision sped faster, images blurring. Elise on a Mercos veranda, watching crimson sails with quiet pride. Elise at Kolop's side, eyes dead. Elise at the head of House Kane, sharp and unbending. Elise's grave, overgrown. His breath came short. So many threads, a voice murmured. It did not come from any throat. It came from the space between his bones, deep as trench water, soft as silt, heavy as an anchor. You stand at the crossing of what was and what might be, the voice said. You have been wronged, Captain, betrayed, broken. You seek what exactly? Pick. The images froze, waiting. What do you offer? James managed, though his tongue felt thick. Anything, the voice purred. Redemption, revenge, resurrection, power over those who used you as a piece on their board. A chance to be James again, not Hook. The scenes shifted, centering on one, James in Turtle Bay, hand whole, past unwritten. He sat at his father's desk, younger, unscarred, picking up a letter stamped with Kolop's seal. This time, he recognized the trap. This time, he laughed and tossed it into the vision. Warped, turned outward, revealing Whitmore slipping on a wet deck, breaking his neck on accident. Kolop overreaching, his own schemes dragging him to ruin. Elise marrying for love, not alliance. House Kane thriving, untainted. You could go back, the voice said. Undo the chain, never lose the hand, never taste the cell, never meet the pirates, never become Hook. The weight of that settled over him. No Rhea's dry humor, no Bren's gruff wisdom, no Kestrel's wind and curses, no crew of broken souls who'd found in him a captain worth following. He would be comfortable. He would be less, or, the voice continued, silky. You could take power now. With the coin, you could rip Whitmore's ship apart, board by board. You could make Kolop watch as his gold turned to ash. You could force Turtle Bay to speak your truth until their throats bled with it. Images of Whitmore's horrified face as the Dauntless sank, of Kolop's house crumbling, of the hook on his arm twitched. What is the price? James asked. The voice laughed. There is always a price, it agreed. A sliver of soul, perhaps. A fragment of sanity. A trade of one life for another. Or simply the certainty that whatever you choose, you could have had something else. That is not an answer, James said through his teeth. It is the only one you'll get. The coin spun faster, symbols blurring into a whirl. Power or the past, Captain, the voice whispered. Choose. The visions resolved into two dominant possibilities. Slip backwards into a corrected life. Lose Hook, lose the Jolly Roger, lose the man he'd become. Gain safety, respect, a clean name, or grasp godlike power now. Become a storm that never ceased, burn the world that hurt him. No third path, except he thought of his first kill on the bark and the mercy that had followed, of leaving food, water, medicine, of the way some of those sailors had later turned up on desperate docks, asking to join his crew. He thought of Velkno's trials, the river of lies, the flower ghosts, the mirrors. Each had tried to twist truth, to trap him in what might have been. He thought of the Jolly Roger's deck at dawn, when the sea was calm and his crew woke slowly, voices hoarse with sleep, unguarded. Those moments of fragile, ridiculous peace. Dangerous men and women showing each other kindness in small, practical ways. He thought of Moss's illusion on the island, offering him rest. He had refused then, not because he didn't crave peace, but because he owed too many people too much to lie quietly in the dark. Do you offer anything that is not escape? James asked the coin. Either from my past or from my limits. Mortals always want escape, the voice said. Chains are so heavy when you believe you didn't deserve them. James laughed, a harsh sound in the void. Deserve has nothing to do with it. Chains are heavy regardless. At the iron that had replaced flesh, forged from pain and choice. He looked at the Jolly Roger, glimpsed through some vision twist of the coin, a ship full of misfits, waiting, trusting that their captain would not disappear into his own desires. I have lost everything once, he said quietly. But I did not stay lost. I built something else, something they did not intend. He lifted his left hand from the coin. The visions faltered. This, he gestured at the comfortable, curated, corrected life in Turtle Bay, at the godlike storm version of himself, is not myself. It is a story you are telling me. You could be more, the voice hissed, for the first time sounding almost frustrated. You could be what they fear in truth, not just in rumor. I already am what they fear, James said, a man they could not kill and could not control. He turned, half expecting to find the coin still stuck to his palm, claiming him in spite of himself. Instead, it hovered where he'd first touched it, waiting, spinning, humming. Behind him, boots pounded stone. Kane, Rhea's shout, ragged. We've got company. The cavern mouth filled with soldiers. Whitmore strode at their head, sword drawn, white gloves stained with jungle grime. His uniform was torn, hair damp with sweat. Behind him, a dozen Marines fanned out, rifles leveled. Of course Whitmore had followed. Of course. Admiral, James said. Whitmore's gaze flicked to the coin, then back, calculating, hungry. I knew you'd chase any rumor that mentioned escape, the Admiral said. Rhea's always run for the nearest swords half raised. James flicked his hook slightly. She held her fire, jaw flexing. You look tired, James observed. Whitmore's eyes were bright, feverish. The jungle is unkind. It took half my men before we reached this cursed hole. But I'd cross far worse for this. He gestured with his sword toward the coin. Do you know what it offers? He asked, stepping closer, ignoring the way the cavern floor trembled under his boots. A chance to set the seas right, to rid them of vermin like you, to restore order. Order, James repeated. By whose definition? Mine, Whitmore snapped. The only one that matters. His control fractured briefly. James saw the man beneath again, the boy who had perhaps once believed in fairness, in justice, only to learn that power bent both. You are a disease, Whitmore said. You and your kind. You infect the weak with this notion that laws should be fair, that the rich should be kind, that the world owes them anything. You undermine everything we built, said softly, is a lie. Whitmore's sword tip trembled. You will hand me that coin, he said, now, or my men will cut you down where you stand, and I will pry it from your corpse. James considered the ring of drawn blades, the narrow cavern, the chasm at his back. He considered the coin's voice, curled like a snake at the edge of his thoughts. Take it, it whispered now. Use it. You could freeze them in place, turn their swords to rust, drop them screaming into the abyss. You would only have to pay a small price. Rhea's eyes met his across the cavern. She did not speak, but he saw the question there. What kind of man are you now? James stepped sideways, placing himself between Whitmore and the coin. You can kill me, he said. You've been trying for years. Perhaps you'll succeed this time. Whitmore's lips will not touch this. You think you can stop me? No, James said. I think I can deny you. The iron curve of his hand dipped through the humming air, catching the coin at its edge. For an instant, cold fire shot up his arm, a shock so intense he nearly dropped it. Then his grip closed. The cavern roared. Whitmore shouted something, an order or a curse. James couldn't tell. Steel rang as his men surged forward, blades flashing in the torchlight. The coin pulsed. For a heartbeat, James saw every sword mid-arc, every muscle straining behind the strikes. He saw the fear in some of the Marines' eyes, the fierce, stupid loyalty in others. He saw Rhea diving behind a pillar, Kestrel dragging a younger crewman down. He saw a path where he raised the coin, thought a single thought, and every blade shattered in their hands. He saw another where the cavern ceiling collapsed instead, swallowing them all. He saw, in flashes, 1,000 ways this moment could break. The coin begged, wordless. Use me. James Kane, who had once believed that fairness could be found in courts, who had been broken and remade in iron and fire, who had chosen to become Hook rather than die in the shape of a man the world no longer wanted, made his choice. He took one step backward and opened his hand. The coin fell. For an instant, it spun in place, as if reluctant to obey gravity. Then something in the world snapped, the hum in the air cutting off like a severed song. The coin plunged into the chasm. Whitmore lunged, fingers grasping at empty air. His momentum carried him too far. The stone at the chasm's lip crumbled, undermined by whatever strange force had held the coin. James threw himself sideways, Hook biting into a crack in the floor. The Marines nearest the edge screamed as the stone gave way beneath them, the abyss claiming them in a rush of dust and echoes. For a heartbeat, the Admiral's eyes could have reached him. No masks now. Only naked fear and furious refusal to accept the laws of simple physics, that a man who had held so much power could be undone by shot out on instinct. Whitmore's fingers brushed his, their grip broke. The stone collapsed. Whitmore fell. His scream dwindled quickly, swallowed by the chasm's endless throat. There was no impact sound, or just absence. Silence united the cavern. Captain, dust rained his softly, hoarse, from somewhere behind a pillar. He coughed once, twice, lungs burning. I'm still here. Most of his men, Kestrel said shakily, peering over the remaining Marines, those who'd been far enough from the collapse, stared at the hole, faces ashen. One let his sword slip from numb fingers, the clatter loud in the stunned quiet. The Admiral, he whispered, is where he put so many others, James said. He pushed himself to his feet without trial, swaying slightly. The hook ached. His arm felt lighter, as if some weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying had finally slipped free. Maria approached, stepping carefully around fissures. Tell me, she said, studying his face, that you didn't throw away godhood on a whim. Not quite a laugh. If I had taken it, he said, what would have been left of me? A god, Kestrel offered weakly. A monster, James countered. A different kind, perhaps. He looked at the Marines, but no better than Whitmore. You have a choice, he told them. Lay down your arms. Leave this island. Tell them whatever story you like. Hook stole the coin. It cursed the Admiral. It sank into the sea. Or say nothing at all. But if you raise a blade now, slowly you will join your captain. One by one, they lowered their swords.